Hi, welcome to my channel, and today I wanted to go over with you why I chose Nest.js as a framework of my choice. So let's get right to it, shall we? So Nest.js is basically, as their website says, it is a progressive Node.js framework for building efficient, reliable, and scalable server-side application. Now, what that means is, basically, it is a framework for backend developers, where it provides you with a bit of a meat or structure to build robust and scalable API service. The alternative is usually like Express, which is probably one of the most widely used backend framework for Node. And I am a big fan of minimalistic framework like that. And honestly, I did not think I would like Nest.js, but I was wrong about that. Nest.js really is great, and I wanted to explain to you what I like about Nest.js. So number one reasons why I like it is that basically it just comes out with all the best practices in creating a robust and scalable API application. Like Express.js is a bare bone minimal framework where you pretty much start out with nothing, and it gives you a lot of freedom. What kind of libraries you want to add on top of it, how you handle like middlewares to access controls, and things like of that nature. And because of that freedom, it is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can work out great, especially when you want something super simple. Then I do think Express is not a bad choice. However, once you start working on a larger project with maybe many more developers, like when you start to have about 4 or 5 developers all working on something, then I think having that structure really is helpful. And because it already has chose a lot of the path you probably had to might have chosen with other frameworks. And yeah, like Express, sometimes if you make the wrong choices, it can really lead to a very messy code base, and sometimes even unmanageable code bases, depending on, I guess, just how experienced or inexperienced the team members can be. So having Nest.js take care of all those decision making, and having that structure for you to code in, I think is actually really great for especially new entry-level developers to come in and just start working in a way where they just cannot go wrong with it. So yeah, Nest.js, it gives you a lot of powerful things out of the box. Powerful meaning like the important things of an API, elements of an API. So for one, I love how they implemented the API documentation using Swagger. So it gives you a self-documenting code base. What that means is just using the decorators here at the controller level, you're able to not only create a route, but it also, you're documenting and generating an API documentation for Swagger. So as you can see here, anything with the add API decorators, you are documenting it. So you can see like get/users means get all users, and I can change this to, you know, find or list users and this will reflect on the API docs. And why this to me is very important is that, you know, when you're a backend dev, creating an API documentation is super important, and keeping them updated is one of the most painstaking part of a developer's life, I think. And being able to create a Swagger API documentation is really excellent. Also, I like how they simplified the whole API output responses. Some frameworks, they tend to give you too less or too much, and it complicates it or makes the code messy. But with Nest.js, all you gotta do is just return either an object or an array, which will basically make it so it returns a HTTP code of 200, which is the default. And if you ever wanted to throw an error like a 404 or 400 bad request, then all you gotta do is you're throwing an exception like this. So if here, you know, if the user is not found, then we're throwing a 404 not found exception, and there you will get back a 404 with the although I mean you can also even custom override the you can add on to some of the messages. You can output a array or a JSON or a message in strings, so you have great flexibility there. It's very easy to throw an exception too. Like if you want a unauthorized exception, then you know, you just start typing, you know, whatever, you know, the name of it. And that brings me to another point. I like how, you know, they have it all, you know, like conflict exceptions. You just start typing conflict and you get autocomplete. You can do you know, bad request exception. So all the common HTTP code errors are here, and you just have to throw them. You know, once you throw it, then it can be done at the service level or at the controller level. So I found that pretty neat, actually. Yeah, because some frameworks, like throwing an error could be something where you do it yourself, where you just, you know, you can create your own like error handler or some, you know, some middlewares. But with Nest.js, they simplified it down to just those things. You either return an object or an array, or you can throw an exception. So that's one thing I really liked. And they also have ACL for, you know, authentication, such as JWTs or like even email and password authentication, and even a role-based access control. I won't go too much in details here. I'll save that for another video. But I really do like how they handle the ACL. It's super simple, straightforward. If you're coming from Ruby, it's very similar to like can. In here they have something called can activate, where basically you create a bunch of guards and you can apply a set of ACL rules in there. And of course it works you know, completely built into Swagger as well. So if you have a route that requires like a JWT, then yeah, all these routes that you can protect them with JWT. So like you see here, these are all protected using you need a JWT bearer token to hit these routes. And validation, I think that is another very important aspect of API. And some frameworks, that's a pain in the butt, but with Nest.js, how they utilize this thing called the DTO, and I really enjoyed how they handled it. So basically, you first create a schema of your table, and some people, I mean, like I used to do this as well, like where I will create a validation on the schema itself, but I started creating separate like DTO classes, meaning so on my user control, where I create the user create DTO. So in the user create DTO here, oh, my computer's going crazy. So you can see that I referenced the DTO object to the user create DTO, which basically validates your request params with the user create DTO specified here. And this allows me to, I don't have to create a separate like a validation, method, go through each of the params. This will take care of everything in terms of validation. This makes it so email is not empty and that it is an email. So if you're on the API, if it doesn't meet those criteria, then it will just give you back a bad request with all the validation rules applied to it. So it is super neat, very quick and easy to do. It does use the class validator class, the library. So some of you are probably already familiar with it. But it's just really nice how the framework kind of ties everything in together with the Swagger documentation as well. So you can see like which fields are required and which are not, and some other validation rules are auto-generated as well. Yeah, and lastly, I like that Nest.js, it lets your code to be modular and reusable. Yeah, it's like when you work on one project and then sometimes you work on another project later, and often you want to copy over some of the stuff you worked on from one project to another, and typically that is not a straightforward task, because there's a lot of there are a lot of things that are coupled together with the your code base. But when you start coding in Nest.js, you can break them into modules, and by doing that, it lets you be able to just copy and paste that folder or that module into other projects, and it lets you to save a lot of time, just reusing some of the code bases. And and I guess like some people, and this myself included, I never really liked the whole concept of dependency injection, but once I got into the mindset of making the code more reusable and being able to identify which what are dependent from one module to another, you start to realize it is a pretty important aspect of it's kind of like package management, where you define all the packages that this project requires. Just being able to document that, it gives you a much better tooling, so your application or your project can, you can know what is required, and it just saves you a lot of time when you're trying to reuse that certain code. And yeah, TypeScript is supported out of the box, and admittedly I was not a big fan of TypeScript. I was a big fan of dynamic typing, and yeah, I hated it at first. I was like really never a fan of static typing in the first place, but yeah, this was one of those things that started to slowly grow on me. As I notice as I'm coding, the fact that it's being able to detect errors like on the fly is something like I started to not be able to like live without. Like I need that now. Like as I code, like I wanted to be able to detect code on the fly, and I also like the ability to understand what kind of arguments or options, like some of the methods like taken. So being able to just see all the what is expected, it's actually pretty nice, because otherwise like this would have been something where you would be glued to your documentation, or even just looking up the other people's library is very difficult, because you can't possibly guess all the parameters something requires. But using this, you can just follow along and see what easily what the options are. So like the find method in the repository, I can just easily go to the find method and then see that what is inside the options argument, and then I just mouse over it here, go to the definitions, and then boom, you see all the properties of that the argument. So yeah, this is something that it did surprise me. Like yeah, I didn't show you this. So yeah, so it's like when you have a method like this, sometimes it's hard to understand like what that function requires, but just being able to go dive into it, and you'll see the options is called find many options. So you see all of that here, which is I think really nice. So yeah, you start to get used to it, and then you get to like it. So if there's some of you who were kind of like me, who were kind of turned off by the whole Angular style of coding, like the dependency injection to the TypeScript stuff, believe me, it would take a couple of weeks to get used to, but once you get over that hurdle, it is something you will actually really enjoy. You won't be able to code without that. And this is coming from somebody who's been a huge fan of dynamic typing, and I wasn't really a fan of like dependency injection too. But this is I think when the framework is done correctly, like how Nest.js has done it, then I think you will greatly appreciate it. So what are the downsides of Nest.js? At the moment, the only two things that I can think of is that like I explained, TypeScript and dependency injection, those are things that might be a turn off for some users out there. but I think those are things that once you overcome that initial, hurdle or learning curve, it's something you will appreciate. Secondly, it is new, and the popularity, though it is increasing every single day, it's still nowhere like near the popularity as some of the other frameworks. So the support might not be as great as some of the other frameworks at the moment, but they do have a pretty active Discord channel where you can go and ask any questions you might have. And that this might be a good thing, but some people might see it as a bad thing, but they're not backed by any big company like Google or Facebook. It's just run by honestly, I don't know how many people are running it. To me, it seems like it's just one guy who created it, and he is part of some kind of a web development agency, which is pretty amazing in itself. I guess it's similar to like Laravel. Yeah, sometimes you don't need a whole big company to do it. It might actually be better that it's just a couple guy with a lot of passion into the project, being able to work the framework how you want it, without any politics. I think that is an advantage. And so yeah, so those are why I like and why I chose Nest.js. And I hope this really was able to portray, at least for my perspective, is why I thought it's really great in terms of how a framework is built. But I would like to hear what your thoughts are. So if you have any thoughts on it, then leave me a comment. And also on my next videos, I would like to get more in depth of some of the Nest.js offerings, how to configure them, and what you can do with it. So stay tuned, and yeah, hit the like and the follow or the subscribe button so that you can get all the updates for my next videos. So alright, thanks guys, and I hope to see you guys again. Alright, bye.